Welcome back to another episode of The Elements of Deep Sea Mining. Joining me today, back for her third appearance, is Elyse Hauser, freelance journalist and publisher of the Notes from the Deep Substack. Elyse, thanks for being here.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So, we're going to do another news roundup episode. And the idea here is that Elyse, who follows all of the deep sea mining news pieces, has kind of put together a list of the big headlines, what's been happening since the last time we did this. And so this is to get kind of just a little bit of topical summary of what's going on in the deep sea mining space, and also to let us discuss what the different narratives are that are emerging in the general press coverage of deep sea mining. And I guess the way we're going to do this is Elyse has picked out a bunch of articles and headlines, and she's going to publish that list along with this podcast on her Substack, Notes from the Deep. So let's start with just a summary of the narratives that are emerging in the news coverage of the deep sea mining space.
Totally. Yeah, so it's still deep sea mining, but now the debate seems to be all about who gets to do it first or fastest, or where or when, or at all. And now the US has emerged as a kind of frontrunner in that debate. Now the US wants to do deep sea mining first and fastest and everywhere in national and international waters. And US mining in international waters is specifically very controversial. There are a lot of countries that are pro deep sea mining, but opposed to letting some other country get in the high seas independently.
Yeah, now that you're saying that, it made me realize that it has shifted the narrative a little bit from should we, shouldn't we, let's have this conversation about the positives and negatives about doing this at all. It has kind of moved the window a little bit towards we're doing this. The conversation is now a little bit more about who should decide how it's done.
Yeah. What is that term for shifting the window of political possibility?
The Overton window?
Overton window. Yeah, it's kind of shifted the deep sea mining Overton window, which is a bit unfortunate because I do think debating about whether we should or shouldn't mine the deep sea is still very important, but it is a bit falling by the wayside now.
But so there's this shift towards conversation about, is the US doing the right thing? Is the US being overly pushy in charging ahead on its own? And how do you see the coverage of that? Is there a lot of inaccuracies coming out of that?
Somewhat. I mean, the idea that deep sea mining in the US is being led by Trump is certainly a bit misleading. Yes, it is currently, because Trump is currently the president of the US and is certainly advocating or has a team that is advocating for deep sea mining. But the US has been in this game for decades, was always a forerunner of deep sea mining research and advocacy in the 20th century. And even if you go back just a decade or two ago, you can find US investments in deep sea mining research and experiments and things like that. So yes, Trump is pouring gasoline on the deep sea mining fire or what have you, but it's certainly not attached to him in any meaningful or permanent way.
And then, I guess we can jump into maybe some of the first news items, still speaking kind of about narratives, because the two other narratives that we've kind of identified is the one about kind of how China is no longer just the big bad wolf in the deep sea mining and in the critical minerals conversation.
That seemed to emerge from the latest International Seabed Authority meeting, where countries that had formerly opposed China for really pushing for international deep sea mining to move forward quickly and definitively are now aligned with China to oppose the US. So it's an interesting shift. It's still emerging. There was a piece about it in Canary Media by a reporter who was at the ISA meeting and kind of saw this play out in person. A lot of countries stood up and made statements against the US, but also said, we side with China against the US. So it's a bunch of countries mostly that are also pro deep sea mining, but they just don't want the US to do it first, fastest, and in international waters.
Yeah. And then I thought that piece on the Cook Islands was interesting. So what I saw there was that the Cook Islands kind of got reprimanded. Well, on the one hand, they got reprimanded by New Zealand, and on the other hand, they kind of got maybe more attention from the US because they had entered into like an informal agreement with China. And so New Zealand stopped a bunch of payments to the Cook Islands because they had entered into this agreement with China. And then I didn't really get the angle of the story saying the US was kind of also rushing in to try to make up ground there, maybe.
Yeah. I think so. The Cook Islands had a partnership earlier this year that they were entering into with China, basically that China would help them do their deep sea mining exploration. The Cook Islands is already doing it, but they could use some, tech and research support from elsewhere. And then just recently, they appear to have entered a similar agreement with the US. But I think the big picture idea is that the US doesn't want China to have too much sway over mineral resources in the Pacific, which is actually an idea I'd like to see explored more in the news coverage. A lot of the news coverage of these partnerships is pretty superficial. Just this agreement is being explored and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Okay, well then I guess then while we're still summarizing narrative shifts, then this shift in narrative from sustainability, kind of deep sea mining is the necessary frontier to provide the metals for the sustainability transition, towards this narrative around national security and defense. And this is a, ability to provide alternative supply chains for critical minerals that are currently being dominated by China. Like that narrative obviously has been happening for a long time. We've been talking about it previously, but it seems to have really come to the fore in news coverage, to the point that Mongo Bay did this piece just specifically on that narrative shift. And I saw that got a lot of attention on LinkedIn anyway, that a lot of people reacted to Mongo Bay doing a story on this. Kind of the reaction was like, the insinuation was that there was something wrong with these deep sea mining companies having shifted the narrative. So a lot of people kind of reacted to that, saying, well, it's understandable that they've shifted the narrative because the narrative is shifting everywhere. And so, like, why are you making a big deal out of this?
That's interesting.
But, yeah. And the response to that is kind of like, yeah, but it's news. I thought it was a legitimate story to cover, that this narrative is shifting, and especially the way that they did it. They actually...
Yeah. So Mongo Bay, in collaboration with somebody else, did a textual analysis of TMC press releases in recent years and made a graph that tracked, how their word choices have become more about defense and less about energy transition type stuff. And it's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, the companies may or may not be within their right to make this shift. I mean, really, they can say whatever they want, but I do think it is newsworthy. And I'm super nerdy, so I appreciated the nerdiness of the textual analysis for sure.
I thought it was interesting. I mean, I don't know if this was the entire basis of the textual analysis, but they gave some examples of the words that they were using. So the sustainability words that they were tracking were words like sustainable and clean energy, but the national security oriented terms were the United States, Congress, China, and defense. And so obviously defense is like a defense coded word. But I thought it was interesting that like the United States, Congress, and China were what they were using to track the narrative shift towards defense. And I mean, obviously the TMC is going to be talking a lot more about the United States lately because they've applied to the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't know how textual analyses are usually done, how these terms are chosen. Maybe if the terms were tweaked a little bit, the graph would look different. But yeah, regardless of the word choice, I think we've all seen the narrative shift playing out in real time also.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, and the other thing I wondered about that is was wondering, like, they specifically looked at TMC's press releases, but I wonder if they had just done the same over like a general swath of discussion about critical minerals or about deep sea mining generally. You might get the exact same results where everybody has shifted in talking from sustainability transition to security. And that's just, I think,
Totally.
just, I mean, frankly, the news in general, I think, has shifted that way. Regard if you just leave minerals out of it,
Yeah.
news
Yeah.
about the energy transition has gone down. Okay, well then let's start with what happened with the International Seabed Authority latest session. So I guess you were following that, and can you tell us what you think were the outcomes?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's get into the details of some of these news items. For the International Seabed Authority session, the outcome was really a lack of outcome. Deadline had been set to finalize the mining code, which is regulations for deep sea mining in international waters, in July 2025, and that didn't happen. And I don't think anyone really expected it to happen, but it was agreed at that meeting that the mining code is still really far away from being finished. No one set a new deadline, which is probably smart.
Mm-hmm.
So the debate goes on. It's really slow, and all the decisions are made by consensus at this international meeting. And it's good that it's slow, and at the same time, I do wonder if it's almost becoming less relevant now that individual countries are pushing forward so quickly. So I'm interested to see what happens.
Yeah, and one of the news items that you highlighted was that the ISA declined to internally review its own procedures. So I guess someone suggested that there should be a review done of whether or not the ISA was kind of capable of achieving its mandate or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they have some sort of internal review process. I don't know much about how it works, but apparently it hasn't been done for several years, maybe over 5 years. And so there's an idea that they should probably do another one soon. I'm not sure that it's scheduled yet, but it certainly seems necessary. I mean, I think we're at a kind of pivotal point where the ISA could potentially do some really deep reflection on what it is and what it's for and how it works, and maybe restructure to be more effective in what it does. Right now, its mandate is to regulate deep sea mining in international waters, but maybe that's not the best mandate. Maybe that can be changed, or maybe the way they go about making those decisions can be changed so that it's not this kind of slow, unwieldy, and ineffective organization that just falls by the wayside.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, a lot of people who I've spoken to have kind of pointed out that the ISA was developed, at a different time in history. It was developed with a lot less understanding of the ecosystems and the realities of deep sea mining, and at a different kind of time geopolitically also. And so it makes a little bit of sense that a reimagining of what that organization is about could be done. But it seems like the news coverage of the latest session, the main headlines are basically that there wasn't a lot of outcomes.
Yeah, yeah, not much to report on there.
Okay, well then let's move to what's going on in the U.S. with the metals company, and there seems to be a lot of coverage of that, and also a lot of news happening there. So I don't know, where's the best place to start?
Yeah, good question. The metals company is doing a lot. They have pivoted to the U.S. regulatory scheme for deep sea mining in international waters. The U.S. does have laws that can regulate that. Other countries, especially those that are International Seabed Authority members, don't think it should have those laws or should do that. But because the U.S. is not an ISA member state, it's got its own regulations, and TMC is choosing that path for now because it looks like it could move faster.
So my understanding here is that TMC has done an application for both a exploration and exploitation permit under the existing DSHMRA regulatory scheme, and then that's pending. But the NOAA, who oversees DSHMRA, has put out a public comment period. Yeah, not actually on TMC, but on this kind of related question of whether or not to change the DSHMRA regulation, DSHMRA being Deep Seabed Hard Mineral Resources Act.
You got it.
And and basically to potentially combine exploration and exploitation into like one, instead of having to apply separately like the metals company subsidiary has done, to make it in the future that you could just submit one application for both things. Which is like, I just think this is a very funny thing to do. So I saw, interestingly, one of the very first comments on this was for someone who was very in favor of TMC's application but opposed to this proposed change, saying this is going to slow down TMC. Like, why are you changing the regulations? You should be dealing with TMC's application and not talking about whether or not you should completely change the regulations. And it's a funny change. I haven't totally understood the purpose of it.
My understanding is that it is a way for NOAA to comply with the executive order that asked them to streamline deep sea mining regulations. And having the kind of double application process would allow a company to just get one permit and basically start their exploitation process whenever they feel like it, instead of jumping through quite so many hoops first. Because as it stands, even an exploration or an exploitation permit would have some exploration component required first. And this would kind of reduce that. Or basically, I'm basing this off of an analysis from a law firm. And so they were looking at the way the regulation is worded, the proposed update is worded, and saying that it looks like it would allow exploitation to happen basically at any time.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, well, that kind of fills in a little bit. Yeah, this is them trying to respond to the executive order by making a change that will streamline the process. Just before we recorded, I was reading the Seabed Spotlight Substack, and he pointed out that somewhere in that wording, it says, in the proposed change, it says, oh, what was it? The exploration, if necessary, will happen. And so it was kind of like, oh, it's opening for moving straight to exploitation without any exploration.
Right.
Which is also, I mean, I guess the details really matter here, because you can say, okay, you can do exploitation without doing exploration, but if you still require a thorough environmental impact assessment before exploitation, that's kind of what matters. And if you require exploration before exploitation but don't require a thorough environmental impact analysis, then kind of having it in two separate pieces is a little bit just kind of meaningless. The key is how much due diligence does the applicant and the regulator have to kind of do before they allow exploitation recovery, I guess is what they're calling it.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, and I mean, these terms are kind of vague umbrella terms, and there's not truly clear distinctions between them in some sense. Exploitation or recovery permit would allow commercial sale. That's maybe the biggest distinction. But other than that, exploration permits could allow really, really large test scale mining. That's basically deep sea mining in practice. So it's more of a blurred line between the two terms.
That's a really good point that I've never thought of before. Yeah, because there is test mining that happens under exploration. So, yeah, without drawing a specific line around where that transitions to exploitation. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, how much news coverage of this has there been? It seems to me like it's a bit slow out there.
Yeah, Yeah, I don't think there has been a lot specifically around this proposed regulation update and the public comment period. I would love to see more appearances of this public comment opportunity in the news just because it's a really nice civic engagement opportunity for people who know a little bit about deep sea mining or are willing to take the time to learn. But I suppose proposed regulation updates for an obscure industry that doesn't yet exist is also not a hot, clicky headline item.
Yeah, for me, it feels like it's a really big and meaty change, this proposed update, and no one has kind of presented it that way in big media yet, despite the kind of amount of deep sea mining news that does get presented in big media. So interesting to see if someone picks that up.
Yeah, I mean, it has the potential to slow things down in the short term for TMC, but I think in the long term, if the proposed changes go through for TMC and a lot of other companies, it could make things move much more quickly. So that alone is notable.
Yeah, and I also sometimes think with things like this, like, again, it's this Overton window idea. So now they're having a public comment period, not actually on approving TMC's application, but on some like actually quite contentious change to some obscure regulations that is, for I think most people, very difficult to distinguish from what's going on with TMC's application. And so I think cynical people have said that, you know, this is them trying to get a bunch of the controversy out of the way on like a related but not actually specific issue, so that they don't have to deal with that controversy on the specific issue when the time comes. That was certainly something that a lot of people said about the process in Norway when it was happening, was that, you know, they're doing this in a certain way to make the controversy happen kind of at a like a glancing angle instead of taking it straight on, which is interesting.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense.
And then, yeah, so more specifically about things that are actually happening with TMC and their going forward. What else are they up to?
Yeah, we could talk a little bit about their updated agreements with Nauru and Tonga. So TMC has subsidiaries in these Pacific countries through which it has ISA exploration contracts, and it recently updated its agreements with those countries to say that if a different TMC subsidiary starts mining the deep sea, not in, not their Nauru or Tonga companies, but somewhere else, these countries will still get benefits from that. The idea being that by supporting TMC's deep sea mining plans, these countries get some money or a new library built or what have you. I don't know exactly what the benefits will look like, but some sort of support.
Yeah, the benefits, I saw the benefits are laid out. There's like a payment scheme that it's a specific amount of money every year after they get a certain threshold of mining happening. So it's not even like a percentage of revenues or profits or anything. It's just once we get over this threshold, as long as we're mining, then I think in Nauru's case, it was going to climb up to $10 million a year, and then it was going to be $10 million a year after that. I think it's very similar in Tonga's case.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, that's very interesting that it's kind of a flat rate.
Yeah, and I think very interesting that they have, I mean, I guess it ties into this, them trying to walk both paths at the same time. So TMC has applied to the US to mine the same areas, and I guess we'll get into this, that it's now come out that, or it's now kind of being made apparent that they are actually applying to the US in the exact same areas that they have their exploration permits under the ISA.
Yeah. Yeah, TMC had kind of refused to publicly state where its US applications were for. And there was a lot of speculation that they might overlap with its areas already reserved through Nauru and Tonga. And then when they just published a couple of new studies, they came out and said, yes, these are the same areas. They do overlap. The US areas cover, the Nauru and Tonga areas. But now they can say, oh, if we start mining through our US subsidiary in these same areas, these countries still get benefits, so maybe that will make them more supportive of that idea.
Yeah, I think it's great actually that and I see it a little bit as them trying to basically make the US approach as congruent with the ISA approach as possible. So the ISA requires that they have a sponsoring state and that they work with that sponsoring state and have some sort of revenue sharing. And the US obviously doesn't require that, but TMC is kind of factoring it in the same way as if they were doing the ISA process, which more and more I learn about this, it seems like that's a little bit the purpose of the US regulations anyway. Like they have always been, they kind of went on the books in the US. At first, they, as you pointed out, they went on the books ahead of the ISA having regulations, exploration regulations, but that they have always just kind of tried to say, okay, even though we're not signing the Convention on the Law of the Sea, we're going to make our regulations kind of match up with those regulations so that we don't have major conflicts between US law and international law. And it seems like even just the way that the like TMC's blocks that they were given under the ISA turn out to be exactly the same blocks as they're applying under the US that they now have, I guess, applied for under the US. It's like we're just trying to make these two things which don't officially agree with one another kind of match as well as possible, which seems like, a reasonable way to go.
Yeah. Yeah. The US rules were initially meant to be this kind of temporary thing that would then feed into ISA rules when the ISA came to life. And so it makes sense that there is some alignment there. And also the idea that the resources of the international seabed should be the common heritage of humankind and shared equitably was always part of the ISA conversation. And that is not in the US laws. That was actually one reason the US didn't join the ISA, was because they didn't want to share.
So I guess we're getting a lot of this information from the pre-feasibility study and pre-feasibility study and initial assessments that have been released by the metals company recently. But I don't know, have you seen those covered in the news anywhere, or are we just kind of getting ahead of our news roundup by bringing this information in?
Yeah. No, I really haven't. Of course, TMC did a press release, and there's some news outlets that just kind of republish press releases. And that's really all I've seen. I think it would be really hard for a generalist journalist to cover these studies in an interesting or useful way because there's so much information there. And I'm reading through them slowly. It takes a while because they're hundreds of pages long. I highly doubt that most journalists would sit down and read the whole thing, and if they did, what would they take from it?
Anything else on specific to TMC before we try to move it along?
I think we've hit all the big stuff.
What about the what about Baron's appearance on the Politico Energy podcast?
Yeah, that was interesting, mostly because he brought up the plans to build TMC processing facilities in the US, maybe in Texas. We're not quite sure yet. And as TMC has now published these long studies, it's kind of emerged that their plan includes owning and operating their processing infrastructure.
This is something that seems to be getting more attention in the news, is the question of deep sea mining processing. And maybe this is just like now the conversation is progressing far enough that people are starting to wonder, okay, what are we going to do with these nodules once we get them to the surface, as opposed to just arguing about whether or not we should. And and it is currently in DSHMRA that you have to process nodules collected under, is it in DSHMRA or is it in BOEM? I forget now, but
it's a good question.
I think it's in DSHMRA. they have a requirement that you process the nodules on territorial United States. So um, I haven't seen that specifically addressed because the TMC right now has some sort of agreement with a processor in Japan, and then they talk about doing processing in Indonesia before kind of doing stage one processing in Japan and Indonesia, and then building out their own refineries to take the intermediate product and refine it into either battery grade or other kind of industrial grade products.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the US has a strong interest, of course, in making sure that these minerals, if they're mined, end up back in the US, but it also doesn't have that processing infrastructure currently in place. So it's a really good question how that could play out. And I mean, whatever is in the rules can be rewritten, changed. There's always loopholes. There can be ways around it. So even if DISH and/or BOEM require mineral processing on U.S. soil, that wouldn't necessarily be an impediment. I can easily imagine at least this administration going, no, we're just going to change that rule. But there would probably still be a requirement that the minerals end up in the U.S. at the end, which would require TMC to have some sort of control over that supply chain.
Yeah, which, I mean, there's always the chance that they're going to end up with limited alternative options if the rest of the world opposes unilateral deep sea mining in international waters and refuses to buy the minerals, which is something that's also at least talked about at this point. But it's interesting that they mention relying on Indonesian nickel smelting capacity at this point, especially considering how much of that is owned by China. It's a little bit of trying to, well, it's a little bit of a weakness in this kind of American owned, home shoring the supply chain. If you're relying on processors in Indonesia, which are largely owned by China, to kind of do the first step before you can get it into your foreseeable refineries that you haven't built yet in the United States.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's very interesting. I feel like I learn a lot about globalization and resource supply chains and things like that in general, just from trying to figure out what would happen with deep sea minerals. And it's such a big unanswered question.
Then let's go to the other case of United States deep sea mining. So this is the application under the Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management, BOEM. Currently, it's Impossible Metals leading that, although I'm seeing that there's more and more discussion of other companies that are taking an interest in that process also. It's not just Impossible Metals that is potentially applying under that regime.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, it's way easier than what TMC is doing because this application is for mining in U.S. waters where the U.S. calls the shots, and there's not this big group of other countries opposing and having the power to oppose that action meaningfully. So I can imagine other countries wanting to, or what other companies wanting to get involved. But for now, it's just Impossible Metals, and they also have recently started outlining their processing plans, which I found really interesting.
Yeah, I guess they've got some memorandum of understanding with ReElement, which is I haven't looked into that, but they're a potential processing option that would consider setting up processing on American Samoa. So what I've seen there is that ReElement is claiming to be mobile enough to kind of set up a processing facility actually there on the islands, which is interesting because this whole like deep sea mining is going to bring a boost to some of these small island nation economies and give them some infrastructure. I've always been skeptical to that because once you get these minerals up on a boat, why would you process them locally and then load them back onto a boat and ship them elsewhere for the next stage? I've always assumed that they would just get shipped to wherever there's existing processing. So it's interesting to see that they are making steps towards doing that.
Yeah. Yes, so the first memorandum of understanding between Impossible Metals and ReElement laid out a plan to ship the minerals all the way to Indiana, which is like in the central US, where the existing ReElement processing facilities are. But then a second memorandum of understanding was signed between ReElement and the American Samoa Economic Development Council, which is a pro deep sea mining NGO actually in American Samoa. And so that lays out plans for ReElement to build processing on American Samoa, which I'm sure Impossible Metals would then use, even though this wasn't their memorandum. So,
Oh, that's interesting. So two different memoranda, as it were.
yes. Yeah, and these things are not legally binding, and there's no way to say for sure whether any of this will happen. But
Yeah,
I
of
do
course.
find it interesting that the plans are being considered at what feels like this early stage.
Yeah, I wonder so much about like these things at this early stage. It must mostly just be signaling to, signaling to market, signaling to regulators, signaling to the local populace. Like, it's good. It's a good idea to make an MOU with the local development council to kind of show that you're open to that. It doesn't mean very much, especially in the time frames that we're talking about here, because nothing's happening next year.
Yeah.
In American Samoa, no matter what happens. What else with Impossible Metals or the BOEM route? I guess there's still an ongoing. You say this. I've lost the words.
Public comment period.
There's still an ongoing public comment period around that.
It's about to close. It's on the verge of closing, but it was focused on the Impossible Metals proposal for mining in American Samoa specifically. So in that way, it differs from the NOAA public comment period about regulations.
Yeah, I guess that by the time this podcast goes to air, that will have closed on August 15th.
Mm-hmm.
But it does seem to, this comment period, to my eye anyway, has gotten a little bit more coverage. Maybe that's why it's gotten so many more comments.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's been picked up by more advocacy groups also. And because it has a local angle, it's about American Samoa, there's a very clear reason for people in or from American Samoa to comment. There's a bit more of motivation maybe than there is for commenting on NOAA regulations for the open ocean.
Yeah, absolutely. And BOEM is also attempting to update their regulations in order to comply with the executive order. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. I think they already have. They didn't do a public comment process thingy on their regulations. I think they just went ahead and said, this is how we're updating things to comply with the executive order. Most of it was streamlining paperwork, making lease terms more favorable, things like that. They said their goal was to reduce delays, improve coordination, and provide greater certainty for industry.
I think also one of the big distinctions in terms of why there's more companies kind of taking an interest in this route of going through BOEM and going into the U.S. territorial waters. Not only is it kind of more certain, more kind of legally, internationally, but aside from TMC, most of these companies don't have the exploration done yet. And so to them, they can kind of start from scratch wherever. So they might as well start from scratch within U.S. territorial waters. TMC, I think, is a little bit committed to taking this more audacious route because they've done years and millions of dollars of studies for their specific area in Pacific, and they don't want to abandon all of that and have to start from scratch somewhere else. And so I think that's forcing their hand a little bit.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, anything specific? I mean, we kind of talked about this Cook Islands development, these Cook Islands headlines. Do we have anything more to say there?
Yeah, I mean, it's notable. It's also really early stages. We don't yet know exactly what all this U.S. Cook Islands cooperation on deep sea mining could entail. For now, it looks like the U.S. offering technology and research support as the Cook Islands moves its deep sea mining exploration process forward. That process is already happening. It's been happening for a number of years. But it is notable, and hasn't been present in a whole lot of press coverage yet, that one of the deep sea mining companies in the Cook Islands is a U.S. company. It's a subsidiary of the U.S. company. So the connection is pretty strong there. I don't think China has that same connection to deep sea mining in the Cooks.
And then, other U.S. mining companies, potential mining companies, Lockheed Martin, which is, actually a defense company and not a mining company, but nonetheless, you revealed to me through your research here that Lockheed Martin not only has it had exploration permits under the ISA schema for quite a long time, but it's also had exploration permits under the in international waters under the US regulations for a very long time. And I thought that was, again, just kind of fascinating how much controversy there is over certain things happening now. And then I find out that some of these things have happened 30 years ago already.
Yeah. Lockheed has, the ISA ones, and then it's just been kind of sitting on these DSHMRA exploration licenses through the US for, decades, and basically not using them. Lockheed did some deep sea mining exploration in the 20th century, I believe, and then just kind of stopped. So it wasn't very controversial because they weren't doing much with it. Evidently, now they might start doing stuff again. The headlines are saying Lockheed Martin is in talks with some deep sea mining companies to partner and try to move forward on working in its exploration areas. It's still a bit vague whether that's referring to US or ISA exploration areas, but I'm guessing it's the US because they're a US company and they might want to move forward with this whole US deep sea mining for defense idea.
Yeah, and I guess we'll get into this with this Loki rebrand.
Mm-hmm.
But the concessions that Lockheed Martin had in the international areas under the ISA, they aren't really under Lockheed. They're not under Lockheed's name, as far as I understand. So they're actually not even under US. They're somehow under a kind of British subsidiary or a British something. So I think that when Lockheed Martin is talking about going forward with its currently held permits, that we're talking their permits under US regulations.
Yeah. I mean, it got quite complicated. So Lockheed had, I believe, a subsidiary in the UK that had the ISA exploration licenses, and then I think it sold those licenses to Loke, a Norwegian company. And then when Loke went bankrupt, the licenses reverted back to Lockheed's control. Something like that. So it got a bit messy.
Interesting.
The dust is still settling on that story.
And then Loki has risen from the ashes under a new company called Glomar
Minerals. Yeah. Loki had several headlines announcing its bankruptcy a few months ago, and now it's kind of come back, although in a different form. Now it's a UK company instead of a Norwegian company, and it's got some new investors, but it's some of the same Loki people opening this company back up.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I saw a little bit of coverage there saying that the Loki people kind of made some effort to make sure that their licenses didn't kind of get sold off to anybody else while they were trying to get themselves back together under a new letterhead. So they've done that, naming themselves after the famous Glomar Explorer, which actually kind of deserves a podcast in itself.
Yeah. Well, it got one, actually. It got one on NPR recently.
Is that right?
Yeah, there was they called it the Trojan Seahorse. A really good episode that delves into the history. It's by Dan Ackerman, who does the Seabed Spotlight newsletter.
Interesting. I heard him tell the story also on the Volts podcast. We should put a
Mm.
link to this NPR podcast in the show notes, because I think that
Yeah.
is a great story that doesn't. Always surprised that it doesn't get more attention, because I got a lot of fascinating CIA spy aspects to it. So
Totally. Yeah. It's fake deep sea mining ship that was actually a CIA mission. It's good. It's worth listening to the NPR piece.
yeah, okay. Then that was a long time in the United States.
Yeah.
I guess this is the reality of deep sea mining news right now, is that it's very US dominated.
Yeah. It's a bit unfortunate, but that's the way things are playing out.
Okay, so then I think that the recent developments in Japan are interesting. There's some non-US news and taking deep sea mining in a new direction.
Yeah, let's get out of the US and go to Japan, where they are planning a big government funded test for retrieving rare earth minerals from seabed mud. And it looks like that's going to happen next year. We'll see how it plays out. It's interesting, actually, not to bring the US back again, but the US has done a test like that. That's the reason a US mining company exists in the Cook Islands, because the government funded a test for exactly this same thing, looking
Really?
for rare earths in seabed mud. And then the company that went out to look for that found resources around the Cook Islands, founded a subsidiary, and is now actively exploring mining there, although they've switched their focus from mud to nodules.
Say that in terms of like the way that the narratives are going, there's so much talk about this transitional shift from energy transition to defense minerals, but the minerals in nodules, nickel, cobalt, and manganese, they have defense applications, but they were like really relevant for batteries. Even now, they're becoming less relevant for batteries, but they're arguably like less relevant for defense. And the minerals that are of interest to the defense conversation, like rare earth elements, is much more kind of critical to military security kind of concerns. And so that also makes this, that Japan is getting into this, a little bit more interesting. It's like if we're really getting serious about the shift to marine mining for defense minerals, then rare earth mud is I think going to become more relevant in the future.
Yeah. I mean, to me, as a non-mining expert, it sounds really hard to take a bunch of mud from the deep sea and extract metals from it. It sounds even harder than taking a bunch of nodules from the surface of the seabed and extracting the metals that they're made out of. So I'm interested to see what the feasibility looks like.
Yeah, you've got the numbers here on like what they're talking about in terms of tonnage.
Yeah, the estimate was that 2 kilograms of rare earth metals will be in each ton of mud, which, even if that's accurate, it seems like they'd need a lot of mud.
Yeah, and you've got here that they're talking about processing 350 tons of mud a day in Japan.
By 2027, it sounds very ambitious to me. I wonder how that'll actually play out. And I also wonder about the environmental angle on this. Is it more destructive to remove mud, where you're actually maybe taking the whole top layer or layers of seabed out, than it is to remove nodules that are sitting on top?
No, absolutely. And what else is in the mud? I mean, there's, I think one of the big concerns about sediment disruption in like nodule mining and in the other kinds of seabed mining that we talk about is the disturbing the sediments kind of reactivates other minerals and other potentially harmful things into the water column. And so what else is in the mud? And I mean, rare earth elements also just more often tend to co-occur with radioactive and other polluting byproducts. And so I think generally rare earths are more difficult to handle the byproducts of. But I have no idea if that's also the case for seabed mud, or maybe this is a better route.
Yeah, it's a story I will be following.
Science news? I was a little bit, I felt like last time, I guess it's only been a few months and science moves at a slow pace. So I was surprised that there wasn't kind of more exciting science news, but
Yeah. I mean, there's always a lot of cool scientific discoveries in the deep sea. I say a lot by, you know, I guess a lot would be a couple per month or something that are published, but they're not all relevant to deep sea mining. A lot of times it's a species discovered in what is very much a non-mining zone. Maybe it's already a marine reserve or something like that. So the ones that are directly relevant to deep sea mining, they're all, of course, relevant in some sense. Everything we learn about the deep sea can inform this conversation. But the ones that are directly relevant are a lot less common.
okay. So what have you got here? Take
Yeah.
us away.
Yeah. So I thought it was notable that 2 new sea star species were discovered on deep sea woodfalls in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, which is one of the main current deep sea mining exploration zones. It's where the Metals Company has their exploration permits. It's where Lockheed has their exploration permits. And just the fact that there's enough wood that falls to the bottom of the sea in a particular area to have species that are adapted to live specifically on that wood is amazing. The sea stars were honestly kind of boring looking. They just were white and blob shaped, but
Yeah,
they live on whatever wood falls down there and are managing to make that work so well that they've evolved to do that specifically. So that's kind of cool.
absolutely. What else? Oh yeah, the deepest ecosystem ever found has been discovered in the Hadal Trenches. I kind of wonder what this means. Like,
Mm.
surely if there was the deepest place in the ocean, then whatever ecosystem is there is the deepest ecosystem. So I kind of I don't know if you looked into that. I didn't get around to that one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the headlines are always a little bit slanted toward excitement and discovery. I think when they say ecosystem, what they mean is that it's the deepest kind of complex ecosystem that's ever been found. So going to the deepest point known on Earth has not yet led us to discover a complex ecosystem there. Maybe there's one that we haven't found. But in some very deep part of the deep sea trenches, not quite the deepest, but farther down than we've found things before, they found quite a complex ecosystem. And it's actually really cool. There's some great pictures of it and some video footage. And you can see these tube worms and these other worms crawling around on them. And kind of, I think it might be methane ice or some kind of ice tracked on
Yeah,
the ground. And it's just really an interesting place to look at and think about. Not super connected to deep sea mining because people aren't trying to mine in the trenches, but it was notable that, at least according to media reports from China, the submersible used to discover this ecosystem will also be used in future deep sea mining. So we have a tech overlap.
yeah, and I guess that is something that is just a reality of this. I think deep ocean exploration is that deep sea mining and deep ocean biology discovery is going to intersect a lot,
Yeah,
especially in the future.
yeah. I actually saw recently a headline that the US research vessel Nautilus, which is a major ocean resource vessel or research vessel operated by a nonprofit, is now going to be sent to the Cook Islands to do some of their deep sea mining exploration to support that.
Interesting.
So, and that's not a government controlled ship, but it has agreed to do something that the US government wants in the Cook Islands. So we'll see how that plays out.
And then I guess we're getting to the end of our list here. Yeah,
Made it.
fun stuff before we sign off for the evening.
Yeah. Yeah, we can just give people the worst headline. I think it's pretty bad.
Go for it.
Trump vows to blow up the ocean. The greatest treasure of all time has just been discovered on its floor.
Trump vows to blow up the ocean. The greatest treasure of all time has just been discovered on its floor. And this is a real news organization. This is a news outlet.
It's, yeah, ostensibly. I don't know that it got any genuine credentials, but it is out there on the internet as a news story. It came up in my research, and it is about deep sea mining. But imagine if deep sea mining was actually done by blowing up the ocean. That would be crazy.
Yeah. Find out how Trump plans on beating China with this great treasure. It's not even that that Trump is gonna beat China to this great treasure, but he's gonna beat China with this great treasure.
Yeah. Just hit people with nodules. That's the US strategy. So yeah, I don't know how this headline came to be, if it was written by an AI, if it was written by a real person who thought it would get clicks, but it is factually inaccurate to a insane degree.
We can confirm that Trump has not yet vowed to blow up the ocean.
Yet. Anything could happen.
Okay, well, on that note, Elyse, thanks again for putting in all this time, assembling all of this, educating me on what's going on in the news, and then taking the time to talk with me about it to share it with listeners who have stuck around this long.
Yeah, I love talking about deep sea mining at length. So if it's helpful to anyone else, that's great.
And yeah, so if this is helpful to anyone, then please rate it, like it, share it on whatever platform you're listening. Tell your friends about Notes from the Deep Substack by Elyse. It's got lots of great resources about deep sea mining, including a great deep sea mining glossary that I guess you keep updated.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great resource for people to kind of get their bearings in all of the jargon that's going on in the deep sea mining space. With that, thanks, Elyse.
Thank you.
I threw my arms up and to the side.